Hey Psyc250 students, this is Chapter 7, Volume 3, last one that we're doing for this particular chapter. We left off talking about, or just getting into, the old name manic depressive, and now the new name bipolar. Manic depressive was used for years and years because of the states of incredible energy the person might get, followed by, or preceded, depending on the person, by a state of depression. Now we have a variety of different possibilities as we understand the illness more, but let's get into the specifics. What I mean by manic or hypomanic is the person's mood is elevated, their behavior is energized. It's almost like somebody comes over and they are on some kind of a substance that speeds up their energy. They talk fast, they move fast. They may talk so fast they don't make any sense. Of course, we have a variety of different possibilities with bipolar 1, 2, and cyclothymic. And then we have this notion that they may cycle into either manic moods and then depressive moods. So you literally have a person who initially appears super energized and then is followed by incredible depression, no energy whatsoever. And you might say, what happened to you? Somebody take away all your energy. Or was that your twin sister or brother I was talking to? So bipolar 1, you have to have at least one manic episode, with or without a history of major depression. By 2, at least one major depressive and at least one hypomanic episode. That's typically our old definition of manic depressive. And cyclothymic is kind of like the persistent depressive disorder, where you're kind of able to function, not very well, but you're able to go to work or to school. It's a milder case of the other forms of bipolar disorder. Again, when we look at the genetic component, we see that depression can be genetically passed through, and so can bipolar disorder. So I always think it's a good idea to look at the family's history, medical history, psychological history. Most of us don't know the history very well. We hear stories of Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so or grandmother dealing with this issue or that issue, but a lot of things aren't very specific, and some people sugarcoat, Aunt so-and-so was special, Uncle so-and-so used to have episodes. We don't know what that means, right? So the more specifics we get, the better, because then we know what is part of our genetic makeup, right? Typically we see the incidence of bipolar illness start to pop up in the teen years and early 20s. You may ask, why then? Why not other times? A lot of biochemical changes going on, a lot of physical changes, and we're just busting into the world at that particular time. When you get older, you sort of figured out how to do things, how to organize, how to set priorities, how to balance your life, or you don't. These times, they're extremely challenging. People are expecting you to be grown up, and you don't necessarily feel grown up. And of course, we know already the factors of stress and how it plays into this. How the person presents could vary from person to person. There could be some really rapid cycling, or it could be kind of delayed in between manic or depressive symptoms. But there definitely is a pattern, a distinct pattern that we see over time. We're talking about a similar percentage when we look at schizophrenia, impacting about 1% of the population. We're seeing very similar patterns for bipolar disorder, although we're seeing an increase in the amount of diagnosis in the United States. And I think not that things have drastically changed, although biochemically a lot of things have changed. It's the food that we're consuming, how we're bombarded with information from our phones and online and so forth. But I think some of it has to do with a better recognition of the symptoms, and that goes across the board. As we get more and more clinicians that are trained, they're just plain better at identifying what's going on. So I'd like to tell you about my case studies. Coincidentally, they happen to occur at the same agency. And that agency is a place I used to work at in Lansing, Michigan. And the name of the place is called Cristo Rey. Now, for our multilingual friends, you can start thinking, well, what does that translate to? Christ the King, right? So your first conclusion, very good Sherlock or Watson, was that this was a religious institution. Well, you would be actually wrong. It actually, and kind of correct in some ways too. It actually was an old elementary school that existed in Lansing, Michigan. It closed its doors, and then the director decided to open up a one-stop shopping for community services. The building looks sort of like this. Again, picture an old two-story elementary school made of bricks. In Cristo Rey, they had everything you can imagine. Health clinic, food bank, clothing bank, employment training, prevention services for kids, language classes. We also had psychological services, which I was in charge of for a while. And during that time, when I worked at Cristo Rey, I happened to encounter a case that I'm calling the artist. The artist was a Mexican-American 20-year-old male who came in. He was previously seen by the previous director of psychological services, and he was also seeing our psychiatrist, who would come about once a month for medication. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder 2, and his primary concern was not really wanting to take the medication he was giving. At that time, it was lithium that he was given, and to a great extent, lithium is still used for a lot of patients. There are other medications. When I asked him what was his reluctance to take the medication, and I know that a lot of us don't like taking meds because of all the side effects and so forth. His was the same concern, except for his argument was that it made him dull. In other words, during his manic state, when he wasn't on the medication, his artistic ability increased dramatically. But when he took his medication, it made him flatten out, and it made him feel very dull. He didn't have any highs, he didn't have any lows, and he had no inclination to want to do any art. And I've seen some of his art, so I thought, wow, he was really gifted. So this idea of taking medication took away his creativity, his ability to create art. And so he would purposely get off the meds, go into a manic state, create art. And of course, unfortunately, he would also not function in other areas very well. And so you can see the pluses and minuses of how he approached medication. My advice to him was to continue with the meds and find a new way of expressing himself artistically. But he definitely wasn't supportive of being so-called normal, if that's how normal people felt. The second case I want to talk about, case study, is called the hitchhiker. Now, with the hitchhiker, it involves the same agency, Cristo Rey, Lansing, Michigan. But this time it involves a 22-year-old Mexican-American female. Now, this individual was also under treatment from a previous clinician, and the case was referred to me. This person was also under the care of our psychiatrist, and the reason why we only had a psychiatrist come in once a month because that's all the agency could afford, and that's all the time the psychiatrist had. So they would come in once a month, and we would schedule as many clients that we thought might need medication to see the psychiatrist as much as possible. So the hitchhiker would describe her manic depression as following. When she would move, and by the way, she was bipolar 2 also, when she would go into her manic state, she would borrow money from her mom's purse and credit cards, and then hitchhike her way across the country, spending money, being very uncharacteristically promiscuous, just living a very random, very dangerous kind of lifestyle until her manic state started to normalize and she started returning back to normal or to the depressive state. And then by that time, her money had run out, credit cards were frozen. She would usually call her mom collect to say, can you send me some bus fare so I can come home? Because she would be 1 or 2 states away by that time. So her manic states caused all kinds of recklessness in her life. And so she was a little bit more open to having a very normal existence. Although her life was exciting and she got to spend all kinds of money and all kinds of things and go on all kinds of adventures, part of her, I think, really wanted to be more of a boring, normal person, so to speak. So that concludes my lecture from this chapter, and what I'd like to do is go over the review so you have the answers and begin to think about how you're going to compose these answers when I actually send you the actual document, the exam itself. Here are the questions. First question deals with the story we just talked about, the artist. Be sure to describe the story, what disorder was involved, how did the disorder manifest. What I mean by disorder manifest is what symptoms did the person have that supported that diagnosis. Same thing with number 6, the hitchhiker story. How did the disorder manifest? What was the disorder? And of course, describing the story. The last question, number 7, deals with Seligman's learned helplessness concept. I want you to describe his experiment, the concept itself, and then give me some examples of how you might think it applies to people. Now you can speak in generalities, or if you know of any specifics, then you can share those too. I hope these videos are helping you in thinking and processing the material. I know that many of you are taking the time to send me those notes, and I want you to continue doing so. If you recall, they are due at the beginning from this point on, at the beginning of the first class that we have, either Monday or Tuesday during class time. So if you submit it after the class time on the first day of the week that we're missing, you will not get credit for that. But I want you to save your notes because they're going to be able to help you to answer those questions. When I do send you the exam, and I'll be sending that out probably around March 26th, you have approximately a week to complete it and return it. So plenty of time to think about and process your answers. I want you to be specific. I want to give you all 5 points for all 10 questions so you can have an amazing score. And I'm hoping our class averages will go up. I don't know. I've never done it in this format. And you've probably never done it in this format either. So I'm looking forward to some really well thought out answers. Give it your best shot, so to speak. Take care of yourself. Say hi to people. Be healthy. And have some fun. Not just all school, watching videos, taking notes, but actually go out there and have some fun. Even if you have to stay apart from people, doesn't mean you can't go and have some fun. Take care now.